Section 2 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Honorable Side.
Which I believe, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Side. Honorable Side.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That constitutional point of order was raised last week. It was about to be raised by Honorable Toby, and it was raised by my good self 4 years ago. So we've noted your point of order. Honorable Raji, please see the chairman business. Honorable colleagues, please, it's important. The House will not sit on Thursday. We'll be both inaugurating and starting the constitutional review process on Thursday. I think it's 10 a.m. 10 a.m. We'll encourage that we are all there for the inauguration and declaring it open. I believe I'm not sure, but I believe the Vice President will also be there as a special guest. So Thursday, there will be no sitting on Thursday as originally thought. So we'll announce the details, venue, and time tomorrow. Yes, Dr. Archibald.
The mic, sir. My name is Dr. Henry Okonachibo. I represent the people of Itu, Ibiono Federal Constituency in Akwa Ibom State. Mr. Speaker, I come under Order 6, Rule 1, 2, and 4 of the Standing Orders of the House of Representatives and Section 17A, B, and C of the Legislative Houses and Privileges Act 2017 to bring a matter of privilege on the need for this House to address a spurious allegation that have been leveled against the House and the members to the extent that it is instigating the masses against this House. Mr. Speaker, there has been a write-up that is claiming that each member of this House has been given 700 million naira, and that we are expected to give each of our constituents 1 million naira each. And it went ahead to say that some members have actually disappeared with the money, while some members are planning to use this money as part of their constituency project. And the message has actually told the masses to hold each member on their jugular. And we know what holding the jugular is all about. That means somebody is trying to sensitize the masses to attack the members and possibly kill members for what I personally do not know anything about. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Archibald, for drawing our attention to that unfortunate publication, but I believe we're all aware of it. sometimes these issues you just ignore. That such an amount of money was given to any member of the House of Representatives is beyond ridiculous. It's even laughable. But thank you for bringing it to the attention, and it's clear that it was just somebody trying to be mischievous. No such amount or anywhere close, or any amount for that matter, not a kobo, was given to any member of the House for his constituency for COVID. Thank you very much. Any petition? Honorable Tijan, did you have a petition? Honorable Agusoye.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, my name is Prince Rotimi Agusoye, representing Oshope Federal Constituency of Lagos.
What's up? I'm good. How are you?
The petition before me is from the President of National Union of Food, Beverage and Tobacco, Nigeria. The petition is against one Lateef Idowu Oyelekan, the National President of National Union of Food, Beverage and Tobacco Employees, and a call on National Assembly to save Nigerian union workers in the Food, Beverage and Tobacco Employees Trade Union. The petition has to do with the President flouting the court order. Mr. Speaker, I seek your approval for me to lay the petition so that Public Petition Committee can take action.
Yes, you may present your petition. You may lay your petition. Dr. Haruna.
Motion matter of other national on.
Okay. That is my own.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues, my name is Honorable Haruna Isa Dederi. I represent Karai Logo Federal Constituency, Mr. Speaker. I'm from Kano State. Mr. Speaker, I have 6 petitions to present. All petitions have been duly signed. The first is signed by Mr. George Ubo, and it is in connection with fraudulent diversion of assets worth hundreds of billions by EFCC. The second one is against Huawei Technologies Company Nigeria Limited for denial of certain labor rights. The third is a petition from an ex-staff of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, for the denial of his salary. The fourth, the third one, Mr. Speaker, is signed by Mr. Madubike Chijioke, and it is in respect of the illegal withholding of his entitlements worth 940 million. The fifth, Mr. Speaker, is a petition against Beijing International for violation of rights and for ill treatment, signed by Mr. Victor Anichebe. And the last one, Mr. Speaker, is in respect of unlawful arrest and subsequent murder of Mr. Kehinde Omotosho. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleague, may I seek the leave of the Speaker and the House to lay the petition, sir?
Yes, please lay your petition. Any other petition? Mohammed. Now we go to this page. Is there any other petition? Petitions referred to Committee on Public Petitions. So we move on to the order of the day. First order of the day is commencement of the general principles of a bill for an act to authorize the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation the total sum of 13 trillion 82 billion 420 million 568,233 naira only, of which 484 billion 488 million 471 million 273,000 naira only is for statutory transfers. 3 trillion 344 billion 380 million naira only is for debt service. 5 trillion 649 billion 872 million 137,899 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 3 trillion 603 billion 679 million 959,070 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending 31st December 2021. Standing in the name of the House Leader, honorable members will recall that the bill was read the first time on Thursday, 8th, 2020. Today is the first allotted day. I now invite the Leader to move that the bill be now read a second time. Leader.
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker, honorable members. Alasan Ado Dogwa remains my name.
Mr. Speaker, I represent the good people of Dogwa, Kidungwada Federal Constituency. Honorable members, I am from Kano State. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I rise to move that the bill for an act to authorize the issue from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the Federation, the total sum of 13,82,420,568,233 naira only, of which 484,488,471,273,000 naira only is for statutory transfers. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, 3,349,642,837,137,889 naira only is for recurrent non-debt expenditure, while the sum of 3,603,679,959,070 naira only is for contribution to the Development Fund for capital expenditure for the year ending 31 December 2021, HB 1069. Honorable members, Mr. Speaker, I therefore moved that this bill be read the second time. Thank you.
Minority Leader, can you second, please? Acting Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, my name is Honorable Gideon Gwani. I come from Kaduna State. I represent Kaura Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the motion on the budget 2021, ably moved by the Leader of the House. I beg to move.
Leader, please lead the debate.
Thank you, Right Honorable Speaker, honorable members. Alasan Ado Dogwa is my name once again. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I represent the people of Dogwa Tudungwada Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm from Kano State. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I believe you may all recall that on the 8th of October, Thursday precisely, Mr. President and Commander-in-Chief of the Federal Republic of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria was on this floor in exercise of his constitutional responsibility to lay an estimate, budget estimate for the year 2021 to this Honorable House, and more specifically to the joint session of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I would like members to recall that same time, about same time the preceding year, Mr. President was also here when he presented a budget that he titled a budget for sustaining growth and job creation. Mr. Speaker, I would like to, on this note, remind the honorable members that while we had a lot of challenges in the course of the implementation of the 2020 budget, as it were, we faced a lot of issues, challenges to do with the implementability of the budget, issues to do with economic challenges also globally. The pandemic we experienced, which is still ravaging the globe, the COVID-19 pandemic, it made it quite difficult for the government to really have it so easy with the then 2020 budget appropriation act. Mr. Speaker, honorable members may recall that this National Assembly has to have a course to now revise the budget itself as presented by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And most of the parameters that we looked at during the revision of that budget, honorable members, Your Excellency, Mr. Speaker, were issues that were directly bordering on some of the impossibility of the achievements and implementation of the budget 2020 based on the projected parameters of the 2020 budget, Mr. Speaker. You can all recall that a lot of engagements with the National Assembly has been sustained, and at the end of the day, we are able to arrive at a midway where we had to cut so much of the capital expenditure itself. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I stand before you out of respect to tell you that despite those challenges, the government was able to perform approximately 50 to 60% in all capital provisions of the budget 2020. In some of the other special provisions, like the ZIP and other special interventions, the government had performed extra ahead of 50 to 60%. And I believe by the presentation of His Excellency, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, last Thursday, he has given us further commitment that government is also looking forward to making further releases to continue to fund 2020 budget as it is between now to the end of this appropriation year, which will be 31st December 2020. It is on this basis, Your Excellency, honorable members, that the government now decided to tag this current budget as a budget for economic recovery and economic resilience. The word resilience, I believe, was carefully chosen because government is all out to now deliberately fight against those factors that really militated against the implementation of the 2020 budget as it were. Issues to do with the pandemic, the falling price of oil in the global market, the challenges we had in the production of crude internally. These are factors that really militated against the implementation of 2020 budget. And for that reason, government has come out with all commitment, with all sense of responsibility to make sure that these challenges will be robustly addressed and engaged. And you can all believe with me that in the parameters presented or laid before us that will now lead the processes of the 2020-2021 Appropriation Act have been put at a relatively conservative rate so that no challenge, economic or otherwise, will be forced against the implementation of this budget that is tagged to be a budget of economic recovery and resilience. Your Excellency, the Speaker, honorable members, you recall the President made it clear that we have tagged the price of oil, the crude oil at the global market at $40 per barrel. Our production expectation or estimate will be 1.81 million per day. The exchange rate of dollar to naira will be 379 naira to American US dollars. Your Excellency, I want to believe, you can also believe with me, these are projections that you can ordinarily conceive to be conservative. They are not meant to be conservative because we want to be conservative. No, they are meant to be conservative because we have been advised, the government has been advised that we need to be conservative so that we will ultimately achieve and meet these expectations. Your Excellency, the Speaker, honorable members, I would like to, on this note, urge honorable members to look at this budget as a budget of general renewance, general rehabilitation, a budget that has a lot of interest to really improve on our infrastructure, improve on education, improve on agriculture, and above all, the budget has that commitment to also provide security of lives and property of Nigerian people, especially in the current situation that we are facing, a lot of issues to do with security. If you look at the provision of the budget as it is to the Nigeria Police Force, which is one of the key and critical institutions, is amounting to about 441 billion naira, which is quite unprecedented in the recent time. The amount of money provided for internal security under the Ministry of Interior is also rating about 227 billion naira. Your Excellency, if you look at the provision meant for the Ministry of Defense, the amount provided for them, I think, is also significant enough that I believe government has commitment, has also exhibited a lot of concern over the security of lives and and security of lives and property of the people of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The ball, Your Excellency, my colleagues, honorable members, is now in our court. The government has done its own part, and we will continue to say the truth that the budget, when laid before the honorable House, is only but a proposal. It is only but an estimate. And I believe with the commitment we have to serve Nigerian people, with the commitment we have to really exercise our constitutional responsibility, members of this honorable House will see reason to align with Mr. President to see that this budget is being given a very speedy passage. Remember, we have also made it uhuru when we made a commitment in the last budget that we will change the cycle from January to December cycle. Like the Speaker has said clearly in his remarks, we have succeeded in doing that. I want to urge honorable members to look at all these parameters, look at all these concerns that we need to work as a team. The legislature and the executive arm of government are all components of one government. A failure on the other side will amount to a failure on this side as well. I believe when we join hands together, especially in the light of recent efforts by government to come close to the legislature, to come and work in partnership with us, their commitment to now have a complete sense of relationship with this arm of government that represents the interests of the Nigerian people, I think the ball is in our own court, and I plead with honorable members to accept this presentation of the 2021 budget in good faith for the overall interest of our people. And when we do that, I believe we will continue to deliver the expected dividend of democracy. Your Excellency, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I would like to, on behalf of the government of the Federation, thank this institution for the kind of cooperation and support they have extended so far to the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. And I would like to urge you to give this budget estimate and proposals a similar engagement, a similar consideration, so that we can speedily pass it and allow the government to commence the business of governance, so that some of these economic challenges, both at micro and macro level of our economic platforms, can be finally addressed. Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I thank you for this time, and I plead with members to also look at this budget from the same point of view that I look at it as the ambassador of the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on this green chamber. Thank you, and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you. I believe the leader of the House, Honorable Dogwa, has covered the whole debate, so we'll put the question. Osai, your voice has to be the loudest. We're still trying to forgive you for your sins. Any contribution on this side? Anyone on this side that wants to contribute? So we move to the next. Put on your mic now if you want to contribute. No. I'm not going with the names. There are people who want to contribute that didn't write names, so move. Jobe. Please, if you want to contribute, you use your mic, you press your mic. That's the only way I'll know that you want to contribute. Honorable Namdas.
Honorable Speaker, honorable colleagues, my name is Abdurazak Saad Namdas. I represent the good people of Ganye, Jada, Tongoma, Belwa. I am from Adamawa State, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to contribute on the principle of debate. Mr. Speaker, this budget, which is christened Budget of Economic Recovery and Resilience, in my view, is practicable, even though we have one or two issues in the budget. Why I'm saying this, Mr. Speaker, is that if you look at the benchmark of the budget of 2021 of $40 per barrel, to me is realistic given the situation we have found ourselves. And to say that we are projected 1.8 million barrels per day is also a little bit practicable, considering the fact that in 2020 budget, even the revised budget, the projection is 1.80 million per day. So this is a little bit practicable. My only fear is the exchange rate, which is 379 as against 360. This one is neither here nor there. but because it's a planning situation, we will leave it at 379. Mr. Speaker, what elated me to some extent is that if you look at the budget projection, it's about 7.9 trillion, now which is higher than the 5.8 trillion that was also projected in the 2020 revised budget, which means there is an increase to the extent that we have 3.9 expenditure for capital expenditure alone, which is also higher than the previous years. If we can increase expenditure on capital, our economy can take off on the good grounds. However, Mr. Speaker, I know that even that the actual collection, the revenue projections are not also the same with the actual collections. Because in the last 3 years, I'm aware also that the revenue projections underperformed with about only 47% as the highest in the last 3 years, which I believe it is not very good. In fact, even Mr. President was worried that the revenue target is not as expected. And that was why the President said that, that this year he's going to fast track to bring the bill of 2020 finance bill so that we can be able to put the revenue issues in proper perspective. Mr. Speaker, I can say that the little bit worrisome thing in this 2021 budget is that we just have to borrow, and which means we are going to finance our budget also through borrowing, and we are expected to borrow close to 4.something trillion, Mr. Speaker. And that, Mr. President, also expressed worry to some extent. But I think the budget is a little bit realistic, but we will have 1 or 2 issues that we have to work on this one. But my advice, Mr. Speaker, that in 2021 budget, since we have a deficit, the borrowing should be more or less internal or domestic borrowing. That will help, because as at today, the interest rate is very low. So if we do domestic borrowing, and by the time we are servicing the debt, the interest rate will be low, and that will be good. And again, we have to reduce cost of governance. If we reduce cost of governance, we are likely to also free cash for capital projects. And that if we free cash for capital projects, that means that the economy will rejig. I'm very happy that the Ministry of Works has the highest. And if the Ministry of Works has the highest, there will be too much construction, road construction, other construction activities will kick off. And that means that we will have the economic activities taken off. Mr. Speaker, I must say that from Yola to Gombe, where our road is having issues and is in the budget, from Yola to Genye, with my constituency, the road is in the budget, it's having issues. So if this money is released, it will really help us a great deal. So, Mr. Speaker, I think we should work hard to see that this budget is passed at the right time, because the planning of the budget will be good, and I feel that it is good for us to holistically work to ensure that this budget is also passed at good time as promised. And I believe that my colleagues will do well so that we can plan well. Where there are issues, we can be able to trash those issues. That is my contribution, Mr. Speaker, and I so submit. Thank you.
On with you.
Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, my name is Cho Robert Auna. I speak for the people of Kwande and Ushongo. Mr. Speaker, this budget, as presented by Mr. President, has some considerations that we'll be grateful for. However, knowing the situation our country is in with health and the health issues we've had in the past 1 year, one would have expected that the budget for health would go up this year. Yes, it has, by a little bit, and the promise for having institutions set up in the 6 geopolitical zones is a good start. But if you look at the budget, 132 billion for health, and then we have a double, a triple of 446 billion for humanitarian and disaster management. In other words, while our country can provide for health with a higher amount, we are preparing more money for disasters that are to come. So, Speaker, honorable colleagues, I think this is not a proper thing to do. I think, honestly speaking, we deserve to put more money to our health sectors. Fully aware of what we have just gone through in the past few months, and knowing that some of these things will come up again, I think the health sector deserves more. So, Speaker, the budget for education capital is 127 billion. No country that wants to develop puts that amount of money for education and puts aside 446 billion for disaster management. Education is a waiting disaster as it is. If we do not budget for it today and not say we can budget that amount of money for disaster management when our schools need the money now, then you will look at the budget for overheads, which is normal personnel. So, Speaker, again, we have had a budget that has a lopsided for heavy expenditure on staff and personnel issues of the government. It is high time as a country we look deeply at this part and hope that our budgets will show more concern for spending on things that will provide for those that are outside of the government system. So, Speaker, these are my thoughts about the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Theo. Honorable Yunusa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, distinguished honorable colleagues. I am Abubakar Yunusa, representing Yamal Tudeba Federal Constituency. I am from Gombe State. Mr. Speaker, this budget of resilience as presented by Mr. President is really commendable. That does not mean that we won't have areas to tamper with. Pursuant to the provision in the Constitution, Section 80, subsection 2, that mandate the National Assembly to tinker with the budget. One area of worrisome is the fact that along the line, the Parliament has been trying to close the gap between capital and recurrent expenditures. When you look at the previous budget, we tried to achieve to close the gap. But here, despite the quantum of the budget, which is on the increase if you compare with the previous years, just like my honorable colleague Namda says, there is much money in the capital higher than last year and the years previous, yet it left much to be desired. Because when you look at the increase in the quantum of the budget, 13 trillion, when you now compare with the increase on the capital expenditures in the previous years, the increase is not commensurate. It's not really proportional to the main total sum of the budget. What I'm trying to say here is that as a parliament, we have to really scrutinize the document vis-a-vis reducing the recurrent expenditure so that we can make the capital expenditure to be moved or to be higher than as it is presented by Mr. President. We spent about quite 7 months in this COVID-19, and it has taught us a lot of innovations. We have innovated a lot, especially to cut down about these international travels. So many things can be achieved without traveling, using these virtual meetings, virtual conferences. What am I saying? That we should try to look into the international traveling provided in this 2021 budget vis-a-vis reducing costs on foreign trip, so that whatever savings we make there can now be added to our capital component of the budget. That is my essence, so that we will now take much due diligent advantage of the lessons we learned during this COVID-19 by attending virtual meetings.
Order, please. Honorable members, order, please. Get back to your seats.
So my submission here is that we really scrutinize this document and look at the MDAs overhead, especially this traveling, vis-a-vis reducing this foreign trip in order to save money to add to our capital component. More so, at the rate at which we are servicing our debt is really commendable, but much needs to be done. When you raise more money, I think the higher we service our debt, the better for us. No harm in borrowing, no matter how much we can borrow. But if you have the capacity and the ability to repay your debt, I think creditors will be looking for you. I mean, so that you can take credit. People will be willing to give you credit. But then we have to do it diligently and managing what we appropriated for that. With that, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Parliament, when we are scrutinizing this budget, we will pay due attention to this traveling foreign trips component vis-a-vis reducing and taking advantage of the lessons of the COVID-19 using virtual meeting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues, my name is Honorable Aniekan Umana, member representing the unique people of Abak, Etimekbo, Ika Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm from Akwa Ibom State. Mr. Speaker, let me start by congratulating the nation and particularly Mr. President and the Parliament for reversing the budget cycle and bringing back the Nigerian budget to a time that will allow us work for the country to function better. We listened with rapt attention Mr. President's presentation of the budget of economic recovery and resilience last week. But Mr. Speaker, I align myself with the thoughts earlier expatiated by some of our colleagues, particularly on the issue of a low allocation to healthcare and education versus humanitarian and disaster management. At a time that the nation needs to up its game in education and healthcare, I think we need to look at that. But more specifically, Mr. Speaker, in implementing this budget, we should look at key areas that Mr. President mentioned, which we have always had in budget cycles without specificity, particularly the issue of the Coastal Rail project as it affects Calabar into Uyo to Lagos. It keeps coming through budget cycles without specific sums and amount allocated. Mr. Speaker, we're interested when baking this budget that these things are made clear and understandable so that this project can be implemented. There was also a vague mention of the completion of the second Niger Bridge. And I think it's important that this is made very specific in the baking of this budget so that that project will come to reality within the time Mr. President specified. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I think the ratio of capital to debt servicing is still too close that we may not achieve so much in terms of the expectations of Nigerians if we do not invest or put more money to capital versus just borrowing and servicing debts. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Honorable Reitory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleague, my name is Honorable Thomas Eritomi. I represent people of Warri Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm from Delta State. Mr. Speaker, this budget presented by Mr. President last week is a budget that is titled, and the title of this budget, it is well known to us, is a budget of economic recovery and resilience. Mr. Speaker, let me first of all thank Mr. President for coming to perform his constitutional role before the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, the thought of my colleagues here is well noted, which have also keyed into their thought. Mr. Speaker, the problem of Nigeria today, we all know it. Most of our roads, our infrastructures are all decayed. If we now have a budget before us where the recurrent expenditure and the overhead cost is taking a large chunk of the total sum of this budget, we have not succeeded in doing anything to help our Nigerian populace. Mr. Speaker, I want to recommend, I'll say clearly before this House that this budget should be looked into with a view to correct some anomalies in this budget. The capital expenditure of this budget, Mr. Speaker, we need to increase it. Our infrastructures, we need to look at our infrastructural decay in this country with a view to improve on it, with a view to service Nigeria better. If you leave this budget as proposed without doing anything, a budget where we have just amount of money for overhead cost, we need to drastically reduce it. Above it all, diversification is part of this budget, Mr. Speaker, which Mr. President have highlighted, that this budget will take care of diversification of our economy, which is very, very key to Nigeria. Nigeria needs to diversify. We need to diversify our own economy so that our source of revenue in this country will not only be tied to oil and other summary, but will be tied to other things where money will be raised to fund our subsequent budget. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleague, much I want to plead with our colleagues that this budget, we should look at it expeditiously to pass the budget with a view of providing the enable services and all the services that we need to provide for Nigeria. I want us to critically look at those key areas that I've mentioned with a view to serve Nigeria better. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Speaker, I am Honorable Kunle Ibrahim Olarwaju. I represent the entire people of Moba, Ido-Osi, Legitimate Federal Constituency. I am from Ekiti State. Mr. Speaker, my contribution will be very brief. The last budget here, I made the same contribution. I find it a little bit difficult, Mr. Speaker. There are some people who sit in Abuja here and begin to budget for me in my village. It is, to me, placing the cart before the horse. I've always advocated, Mr. Speaker, that there should be interactions between ministries, MDAs, and agencies before budget is drafted at all. There is practically little can the parliament do after budget has been presented. Before you know it, they begin to give terms on our interventions, the level at which we can intervene. Mr. Speaker, we need to entrench it now. There must be interaction between MDAs, agencies, and ministry with parliament. We are the direct representative of the people. I must be able to tell Ministry of Agric what my people want. I must be able to tell commerce and industry what my people are expecting. Where agencies just feel they needed corn in Adamawa and they needed to give fertilizer for rice in Ekiti. It doesn't work. There must be interactions between parliament to determine what our people want. That is the reason why we are here. We can talk all the talk here, speak all the English here. The budget has been presented. We can do practically nothing to affect directly our people. I therefore plead with Mr. Speaker and the leadership of this House that before budget is presented, there must be a timeline within which agencies, MDAs and ministry should interact with the parliament before presenting the budget. Mr. Speaker.
Is Honorable Kuya here? If you are here, Honorable Kuya, please approach the chair. Honorable Rotimi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dear colleagues, my name is Honorable Prince Rotimi Agunsoye, representing Koshope Federal Constituency of Lagos. I rise to lend my voice, one, to support this budget and to make my comment as regards the budget. Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, yes, Mr. President has done well by terming this budget of economic recovery and resilience. Yes, we want to recover from the bad economy and also to recover quickly from difficulties and toughness that we have found ourselves. Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, number one, budget should be based on the population. How many are we in Nigeria? In the area of health, in the area of education, without the population, you cannot budget properly. That is that. But it has, within the last 6-7 months or more, we've been able to know quite well that without going abroad, we can survive on our own in Nigeria. I'm going to help now. I expected in this budget that under capital, be it under health or general capital, that they should have made provision for us to reconstruct the general hospitals, or we make provision for about 2 from 6 regions to construct good hospitals with standard equipment that can take care of our health. I expected that, and that is not here. I think nobody envisaged COVID. Nobody. But it is here, and we are coping with it. Mr. Speaker, dear colleagues, I think budget should be in that direction. Thank you. That is my contribution.
Thank you, Honorable Rotimi. We'll take just one more from this row because we've got to move on. Yes. And then I think we'll do 5 per row, and then tomorrow we'll continue. Otherwise, Honorable Makwe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues. I'm Honorable Zakaria Doda Nyampa, member representing Madagali Michika Federal Constituency. I'm from Adamawa State. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleague, I appreciate the budget speech, the budget presentation of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. I so much commend paragraph 63 of his speech. In that paragraph, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the President made mention that the main thrust of our capital expenditure spending in 2020-2021 is the completion of many ongoing projects as possible across the country. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, I'm from one of the most devastated communities, the Madagali Michika. We have our ongoing project that has been abandoned. And honorable Speaker, I plead that this House will take note when he's prioritizing the ongoing project, that area of Madagali, that's the Kuzum Bridge, the Urungandi Bridge, the Limankara Bridge, all in Madagali and Michika, be considered, because the provision there has increased. In last year, we know the budget provision was 2.3 trillion on capital. But thank God this year, we have a budget of 3.6 trillion as capital expenditure. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand for my people. I plead that the ongoing project from the far northeastern part of this country that were neglected be considered, because as big as our constituency is, as rich as they are in agricultural production, we have been cut off because we have our ongoing abundant capital project. So, Mr. Speaker, I plead that as good as this budget is, my constituency should be considered as priority, and Mr. President should consider the plight of our people. This is my contribution for this budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remain Kabir Al-Asarurum. I represent Rano Bunkura Chibia Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I am from Kano. Mr. Speaker, my respected colleagues, the 2021 budget estimate as presented by Mr. President has come on time, and there is need for us to concentrate and ensure the quick passage of this very important budget. Mr. Speaker, my respected colleagues, the budget of economic recovery and resilience, parameters and physical assumption underpinning the 2022 Appropriation Act, where the oil benchmark was put at $40 per barrel, and daily oil production estimate of 1.86 million barrels, inclusive of condensate of 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day, and the excel rate of $379 per dollar. I strongly believe we can do better. Mr. Speaker, my respected colleagues, my take-home home is in the issue of Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Agriculture remains the source of income and livelihood to the majority of the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, my respected colleague, I participated in this budget today. Critical look and question must be asked. What is the situation of agriculture and rural development today? As we all know, over the past 5 years, this administration has put the condition of the lives of the citizens of Nigeria has been taking shape in agriculture. We must do our possible best to ensure this very fundamental sector has an improve. I believe the allocation to the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development
need an increasement. Based on the performance of the 2020 budget of sustaining growth and job creation, with a revised estimate of benchmark of oil price of $28 per barrel, oil production of 1.80 million barrels per day, and the exchange rate of 360 to the US dollar. A total sum of 183.1 billion naira was allocated to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, with a sum of 58 billion naira for current expenditure, while personnel costs and overhead costs amounted to 56 billion naira and 2.28 billion naira respectively. Capital expenditure summing up to 67.94% of 124.39 billion naira. A sum of 183.1 billion naira being 1.72% of the total budget expenditure was allocated to the Ministry for the Agriculture for the year 2020. Appreciable success in rice and other crops, mainly through the Anchor Borrowers Program and the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative, anchored by the CBN and the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, respectively. Acceleration of the construction of 337 rural roads around the country, especially in the areas of agricultural corridors, to enhance access to market and reduce post-harvest losses. My colleagues, Mr. Speaker, my respected colleagues, I think there is need, based on the aforementioned statistic, there is need for this very important House to look where we are going to increase this very important aspect in the budget. There is need for a total increment in the 2029 budget in the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please hit your microphone if you want to. Honorable Koko.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues. My name is Honorable Koko. I represent the good people of Koko, Bese and Mahima Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, I'm from Kebbi State. Mr. Speaker, sir, I have gone through this budget, more especially the budget of Works Ministry, Agriculture and Rural Development. But, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, to my dismay, everybody knows what my state, Kebbi State, suffers these days. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, we suffered COVID-19 pandemic. And presently, Mr. Speaker, we are suffering from flooding. Our bridges, our roads, our people. As I'm talking now, Mr. Speaker, we have more than 5,000 to 10,000 IDPs scattered within camps and secondary schools. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, this budget did not say anything, did not try to manage or do something about our bridges, our roads, generally our infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, to mention specifically the bridge that connects Benin Republic and Niger Republic from Bagudo and Kaoje, that bridge has collapsed because of the flood. In Argungu, Mr. Speaker, the bridge that connects my state, the Kebbi State, and Niger Republic, it has collapsed, Mr. Speaker. We see the level of damage we had, the loss of rights. Mr. Speaker, Federal Ministry of Works did not cover these affected areas, more especially federal roads, where the bridges, roads has collapsed. I don't know what we are going to do, Mr. Speaker, on this. But I want to appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, and appeal to honorable colleagues, we should not forget our people. We contributed so much. We contributed so much, more especially in the rice production. 60–70% of the rice we eat in this country come from my states. We suffer that. We don't have anything now. In addition to like I've said, the bridges, the roads that have collapsed. Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking now. I'm pleading with you, Mr. Speaker, to please do something about this road and bridges that collapsed in my states. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Who's that next to Gagdi? Is that Benjamin? Yes, Honorable Kalu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Benjamin Okezie Kalu. I represent the good people of Nigeria, starting from Bende Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, I'm from God's own state, Abia State. This morning I rise to commend the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria for believing in the sustainability of this change of the budget calendar from what it was to what it ought to be, which is from January to December. It had so many benefits. That is why we are talking about the budget today. That was why they submitted it on time. Having said that, I want to commend the executive as well for showing the political will in making sure that the implementation of the 2020 budget was not just on paper, but in reality. Why do I say so? The analysis at 15th September of this year shows that a commitment from the Federal Republic to all the MDAs was at 1.2 trillion released for capital projects to all the MDAs who can state courageously that they have received 50%. Early enough, it has never happened like this in a long while. I also want to commend the federal government for their interest and insistence on agriculture. When the borders were closed and we thought we were all going to die for lack of importation of rice, today the rice farmers have enjoyed this particular support from the federal government. I commend them for that our domestic rice has now become very competitive. I also want to commend them for implementing what is known as the Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme. This has helped this Federal Republic to achieve some milestones, one of which is the road called Lokoja, Obajana, Kaba, Ilorin Road. The Section 2, Obajana, Kaba, in Kogi, Kwara State, was achieved through this particular implementation of Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme. The same goes for Apapa, Oworo-Shonki, Ojota Expressway in Lagos State. It was through the implementation of this Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme that they were able to achieve that. Also, the road known as Bodo Boni Road, with bridges across Opopo Channel in Rivers State. This is also because of this implementation of Road Infrastructure Tax Credit Scheme. The willingness of the Federal Republic to prepare and publish what is known as the Tax Expenditure Statement, which has made it difficult for people to understand how much tax incentives that we give out, tax exemptions, tax rebates, which is some of the places our revenue of the country has been leaking. This government has insisted that it is going to be published, it's going to be prepared and published so that we will know how to mop up revenue from that angle. That demands commendation on the 2020 budget. Going forward, I like the way they tap the new budget. The new budget says, budget of economic recovery and resilience. And it has the target, 4 cardinal targets, which is to accelerate economic recovery, promote economic diversification, enhance competition, and ensure social inclusion. Very wonderful. And we are able to draw up a good parameters, a good sound parameters, where they hinge this budget, which I commend. I commend the $40 per barrel benchmark. I also commend the 1.86 million barrel per day. Although I have to argue that it is important that the Federal Republic of Nigeria make it clear whether or not the 1.86 million barrels per day includes the 300,000 to 400,000 barrels of condensate. Is it among the 1.86 billion that they are talking about, or is it excluding the 300,000 and the 400,000 condensate? Because OPEC is always confused when it comes to the computation of this particular aspect. It has to be clear. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleague, the GDP growth rate of 3% is in order. To my own understanding, the foreign exchange rate at 379 naira per dollar is also in good. Inflation at 11.95% is not bad. But let's look at this, which is where I have issues with. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the aggregate expenditure, the available ratio shows that statutory transfer, Mr. Speaker, at 488,471.273 occupies 3.70%, Mr. Speaker. And that is where the money that is coming to the National Assembly comes from. I will take you back there. Debt services is 25.6%. Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditure, again, recurrent expenditure, which is at 5.6 billion, it is occupying a humongous 43.19% of the budget. Recurrent expenditure. And capital expenditure is occupying 27.55%, which is very bad, which is very poor, Mr. Speaker. Why do I make this emphasis on the recurrent expenditure as well as the capital expenditure and also the statutory transfer? I say so because the 4319 recurrent expenditure is on the executive. When they say the cost of governance is high, Mr. Speaker, I want to draw the analogy that this high cost of governance is not on the legislative arm. It is on the executive arm. Because we are not part of this 43.19% in recurrent expenditure. We are only occupying 3.70%. And under that 3.07%, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Kenken, are you here? Louder.
And in rounding up, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the high cost of government is on the executive, not on the legislature. And there is the need for them to review that. And there is the need for us to look at our capital. As we consider this budget, the capital expenditure is too low. Because the president said they are going to complete already existing projects. We agree. But if you complete already existing project, what happens to these new members who are representing constituencies having new challenges? How do they get that captured in the budget? I come from Ben, the federal constituency, and which borders Equano constituency as well as Ohacha constituency. We have a road that we cannot use to go home. And we have been pushing for this road to be done. And if this road is not captured in the budget, if there's no fund for it to be taken care of, what do we tell our people that have sent us here? Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, I want to bring the attention finally to the ratio. When people complain that Nigerian National Assembly have been having a high amount of money, I want to argue in a different direction. Mr. Speaker, do you know that our percentage in 2019, Mr. Speaker, was 1.42% of the entire budget? In 2020, Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly budget was reduced to 1.18%. And do you know, Mr. Speaker, finally this
Honorable Ben, let's 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Mr. Speaker, I'm doing comparative analysis shows that we have been on decline. The budget of the National Assembly. In 2019, it was 1.42% of the entire budget. In 2020, it was reduced to 1.18%. Mr. Speaker, are you aware that currently our budget has gone further down to 0.98%. It ought not to be so, because it puts a burden on us to be able to oversight this trillion of naira. There is no amount of money that is enough for us to be able to push through and get the job done. We need Nigerian government to reconsider that the National Assembly needs money to get our oversight function done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Ben. Let's restrict our contributions to two, because there are so many members that need to contribute. Honorable Gagdi, we have, I think we congratulate you on your bill that passed, the Police Reform Act. Well done once again, and thank God for your bill on police reform. A lot of the things that are being agitated for, people are already, is already in legislative format. So please restrict your contributions for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Yusuf Adamu Gagdi. I represent Panshinkanke Kanam Federal.
Okay, yes, Engineer Sule, please, you act as the whip in the absence of Honorable Monguno.
I represent Panshinkanke Kanam Federal Constituency, Mr. Speaker. I'm from Plateau State. Mr. Speaker, I stand to agree with my previous speakers, my colleagues, on commending increments made by federal government, by Mr. President, on most of the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. Because of time's constraint, I may not go through them, but I want to specifically mention the ministries that have not been mentioned either to this moment, which is education, that stand as the bedrock for any meaningful development. The 63% increase in budget on education is highly commendable. However, Mr. Speaker, let me comment on the however. Since my previous speaker have talked about aspects that federal government have done tremendously well. But Mr. Speaker, I want to commend your leadership, particularly Committee on Finance, for making us discover a lot of things. Mr. Speaker, my comment will shortly center on revenue encumbrances in this budget that is presented to the 9th National Assembly under your able leadership. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have poor revenue management. The Committee on Finance have gone on oversight function, invited ministries and departments and agencies of government, and equally discover mismanagement or poor management of our revenue by agencies responsible for the coalition of those revenues. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the revenue very well, it is not all about presenting issues to the National Assembly. Federal government some times ago have increased tax. They have increased VAT and other aspects of revenue in this country. But Mr. Speaker, if you look at the 4 pages of this, the 4 angles of this budget, how has that increment affect the revenue generation in the 2021 budget representation? Mr. Speaker, I think there is a bureaucratic conspiracy somewhere that committees need to live up to expectation by suffocating agencies in a very democratic manner and in such a way that we will discover why is our revenue not dynamic revenue generation. Why is it standing where it is if we have increased tax, if we have increased VAT that equally added to the hardship of Nigerian people? We need to see the positive consequences of those increments on our revenue generation. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the revenue generation, the share of federation revenue stand at 3.502 trillion. But that is a revenue that comes from salaries, that comes from most bulky aspect of federal government. But when you look at the other sectors of revenue, they are nothing to take home about. Mr. Speaker, each and every committee must put into consideration the position of the House Committee on Finance in terms of their recommendation on the poor management of revenue collection or generation by federal agencies. Yes, Mr. Speaker, you will equally see and agree with me that you discover that we have a surplus budget of 5.19 trillion and we equally have a debt funding of 4.2. Mr. Speaker, my common sense will not understand a budget that has a surplus of 5.1 trillion as well as debt funding amounted to 4.2 trillion, including debt borrowing of 3-point-something trillion. Mr. Speaker, to me, in terms of revenue, the budget is not balanced. In terms of our debt funding, the budget is not balanced. And until and unless we strengthen institutions, agencies of government, to ask them questions about their revenue generation, do not hope that we have. Finally, Mr. Speaker, in as much as I advocate for speedy passage of this budget, I commend you for allowing members to argue on it today, tomorrow, so that Nigerians will understand the content of the budget presented and so that Nigerians will equally know that National Assembly have studied the budget and we are willing to adjust it to the best of our ability. I stand here representing the people of Panshinkanke Kanam Federal Constituency, and I will ensure, Mr. Speaker, that 2020 budget was to carry over capital projects. How has those projects been implemented? How are the money released to those agencies? Does it compute with the project implemented on ground? And to equally ensure ongoing projects within our constituencies are completed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me 2 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Gagdi, and I observe that there's good coordination between yourself, Coco, and Kalu on the points made. Well done. Honorable Oshoba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Olumide Oshoba. I represent Abeokuta North, Obafemi Ode, and Odeda Federal Constituency. Let me start by commending the leadership and my distinguished colleagues for the swift passage of the 2020 budget. After the passage, we had the COVID, which hampered the full implementation of that budget, and it had to be amended a bit. Now we are back into the budget season. What is most important is the legislature, the House of Representatives and the Senate are going to do their bit in passing the 2021 budget on time. It is left for the executive to implement the budget on time. The situation where we have capital projects being funded at the end of second quarter, third quarter has to stop. I want to align myself with my colleague. If revenue generating agencies declare their revenue on time, those budgets, the capital projects will be funded in the first quarter and second quarter. It won't be the third quarter or even the fourth quarter that implementation will start. So in commending the Finance Committee by discovering all those agencies that were not remitting the right funds, I want to commend the House Committee on Finance. We should be able to continue this drive of making sure revenue generated is declared into government quarters. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, there's a lot of traffic and a lot of pressure on that road. There are communities in that axis, the Mowe, Orimerumu, Bakuro, and Makogi, Magbura axis. An alternative road is there. I want the federal government to look into making that road motorable so that whenever there's any problem on the express, we can use that alternative route to get to our various constituencies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Oshoba. If everybody can be like Honorable Oshoba, restrict yourself to within the 2 minutes. Within those 2 minutes, a very, very fine point That is that it's one thing to pass budget on time, which we have done our own, at least we did last year, but it's another thing for on-time implementation. So there's a disconnect between the two. So thank you for the contribution, Honorable Oshoba. Honorable Jaha. Is Honorable Jaha there, Amadu? No. Benny Bakwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remain Honorable Ben Roland Sigbakwa. I represent Ethiopia East, Ethiopia West, and by the special grace of God, we're from Delta State. Mr. Speaker, I want to join my colleagues to thank Mr. President for exercising his constitutional responsibility in Section 81 of our Constitution by bringing the budget on time. And be that as it may, Mr. Speaker, Section 4 of the same Constitution gives us the power to make laws. I wouldn't want to bother us on the fraction, on the Fiscal Responsibility Act, because Mr. President himself understands that and he put it to us, and I'm sure as a House we'll look into that. Section 12, subsection 1 of the Fiscal Responsibility Act provide for 3% deficit, and that I know we'll look into. Mr. Speaker, our debt servicing is 3.1%. We have a recurrent of 5.6 trillion, and the capital is 3.6, which is better than the one of last year. Mr. Speaker, we all know that he who goes a borrowing goes a sorrowing. And the issue here is not about borrowing. The issue is about how do we apply the funds that are borrowed. Again, that brings us to one thing that Mr. President said in paragraph 34 of his address, that we should follow the revenue, just like we are following the expenditure. Mr. Speaker, one of my colleagues has said it all, that it is one thing to pass the budget. It's another for the House to actually ask questions as to how these funds are being applied. Mr. Speaker, you will understand, Section 88 and 89 of the Constitution give us the powers of oversight. And here we are borrowing, we are running a budget of deficit, and each time we try to ask questions, the same people that are borrowing, which is the executive, they come here, they harass us, they insult us, and at times we are even ignored. And Mr. Speaker, I think as a House and a Parliament, we should be able to put something in place to deal with this issue. Because if we cannot ask questions and we are approving authority, I know of so many people where I have been asked, but the House is aware. Why are you questioning it now? Mr. Speaker, you will help us and appeal to our chairman, just like somebody said just now, we should now wake up in our oversight to ensure that funds that are allocated are applied judiciously, and Nigerians should know. Again, Mr. Speaker, the President was magnanimous enough to have directed that 50% of the capital budget of 2020 be released. This is October. We should ask the question if this NDAs has actually released this fund and the procurement process has been completed. Mr. Speaker, for any project that is construction-based, in October it is raining in Nigeria, especially the area where I come from, where I cannot even go to my house now because the roads are bad from Warri to Saple and Benin. No project can happen there now. And if a ministry, department or agency of government that got the budget in January, till date did not go through procurement process, and the projects are, the funds are still with them, thank God for TSA, I think there's something wrong. And the executive...
Silence, please. Honorable members, please listen in silence.
Can you press your mic?
Okay, so thank you very much. So like I'm saying, so many agencies are still crawling with their procurement process, despite the fact that we passed the budget on time. It is expected that because the appropriation bill is an act, and once Mr. President signs one, it automatically supersedes the previous one. And if another budget is coming, we will pass the new budget. By the time we pass and Mr. President assent to it, that means the one of 2020 is gone. And what happened to the project? What happened to our constituents that are expecting? Because we are being asked, and we say, oh, so thing is in the budget. We've been able to influence that. Until date, Mr. Speaker, these people are not doing anything. Then, finally, Mr. Speaker, the issue of the service-wide votes. If we are running a budget of deficit where we have to borrow, why should we put 350 billion in the special intervention fund, recurrent? If there's going to be special intervention fund for recurrent, then there should equally be special intervention fund for capital. Because it is only capital that we can see when we leave office. The number of flights that we take, the number of food that we eat, nobody will know it, Mr. Speaker. I think these are my observations, and I want to thank you for the opportunity and to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that in Delta State, from Warri to Benin is no longer possible. The Ministry of Works should do that for us and ensure that Nigerians have every right to be happy with the government. Thank you very much.
Honorable Abejide.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Honorable Lefi Abejide, member representing the good people of the Abakere constituency. I'm from Kogi State. My contribution is going to be very short, Mr. Speaker. I want to also join my voice with those of my colleagues to appreciate the President for coming on time with the budget. I have a problem with the parameters and the fiscal assumptions underpinning the budget, especially the benchmark of $40 per barrel. If you look at the world market today, the crude oil price is struggling between $36, $37 per barrel. And why people complain about this is because we don't know what is going to happen next. It's like it's overambitious. Why don't we look a little bit below so that at the end, if the price goes beyond 40, then we have opportunity to use it in excess crude. Another area that I want us to look at is the area of revenue. After FIROS, Nigeria Customs Service is next. And they make their revenue through majorly imports, through custom duties. And if you look at our ports all over, they are challenged. There are serious congestions. Before now, in a week, Nigeria Customs can generate, if you convert the current amount of money that generates now, if you divide it by the rate of exchange rate, and then look back 7 years back, you will discover that it's only the volume of Naira because of devaluation that you see they are generating revenue. The revenue they are getting is a bit lesser compared to the past if you look at the exchange rate. They will have done 3 times of what they are doing now if the ports are in order. The ports are so congested that they cannot function properly. And this budget, when I look through, I didn't see any serious impact that is going to have on these ports. If we don't put the port right, even the export that's supposed to be injection into our economy, that is, it will bring in inflow, continue to be challenged as well. To even do exportation of all agri-produce in Nigeria now is like passing through the eye of a needle. It's very difficult, and all what they're supposed to get as injection has been taken to another country. Most of the exporters have moved to Cameroon. Some have moved to Togo. Some have moved to Cotonou from Nigeria here. So we need to look into these areas so that our revenue can be solidified, can be enhanced. This is my contribution, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, I think we're just going to restrict ourselves to 2 more on this row and then move to this row and that row. The rest will come back tomorrow. So we're coming down.
Oh, that's okay.
Ali Shatima.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for recognizing me. Honorable colleagues, I am Honorable Lawan Shatima Ali.
Honorable Yusuf Gardi, please allow the Speaker to concentrate.
Representing Bursari, Gaidam, Yunusari, Perel constituency, and from Yobe State, sir. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I must commend the effort of the executive by keeping to the cycle of our budget as being pledged by the Ninth Assembly to maintain that under your good leadership. Mr. Speaker, much has been said about this year's budget, particularly on the size of the budget, on the revenue being expected. But Mr. Speaker, as being observed by most of my colleagues, the issue of capital budget being projected for the 2021 fiscal year, there's need for increment. This is due to the fact that, Mr. Speaker, as being said by Mr. President in his speech, particularly the road sector, that is infrastructural sector, there's need for us to have much more funds to realize our dreams of restoring the lost glory of our infrastructure across the country, particularly roads and bridges. Mr. Speaker, we cannot project or estimate over 5 trillion for our recurrent expenditure and say we will only project 3 trillion for capital expenditure if we are so serious to develop this country or to rebuild most of our collapsed and failing roads, including bridges. As I'm talking to you now, Mr. Speaker, I reliably learned that we have over, or the Federal Ministry of Works and the Housing are having backlog of over 300 billion worth of CBs to be cleared for this year's alone. And now there were only 400 billion being proposed for them for the next fiscal year. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I appeal to this Honorable House, the infrastructural decay across this nation need more than 400 billion ministry. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, there's need to see inwards, at least to import technology into our country, rather than always talking of borrowing from outside to come and develop our country, particularly in the rail sector that we are talking. Mr. Speaker, I happen to be a member of the Steel Committee when around 2 months ago, we visited Ajakuta Steel Company. Mr. Speaker, there is need for the government to focus attention to complete the Ajakuta steel. We were assured there that if they were, that particular company is being completed 100%, they can even handle the rail construction across the country. We need not to go outside to China and the other countries for us to develop our rail sector or rail lines in this country. So, Mr. Speaker, there's every need to have a very aggressive approach towards developing the infrastructural side. That's particularly the where I said there is need for us to increment in the capital sector. In this, furthermore, Mr. Speaker, I need to suggest that the executive should revisit the issue of mobilization for construction firms. There's need for any construction work to be mobilized with at least minimum of 30% for them to be on site to continue work. As I'm talking to you now, Mr. Speaker, there's a road I know in my state, that is Yobe, linking the state capital to other part of the northern part of the state, which was awarded by this present government almost 1.5 years ago. The contractor could not be mobilized to site because no single cover was given to that contractor. So this kind of things, it seems, handling these over 700 or more of capital projects across this nation, there's need for us to have a very aggressive approach for funding so that contractors should be on site to have a very facilitated work for Nigerians to use such facilities. So, Mr. Speaker, with these few remarks, I still appeal to this Honorable House to make a way for the increment of the capital allocation. Thank you, sir.
So one more. Okay. Who, between Halims and Haruno. Who's ranking? Who's older? Okay, they're both.
Is the chicken that?
They're both new members.
Chicken and egg story.
But Haruno, you're a chairman, right? Okay, let's give the opportunity to the non-chairman to speak. No, Haruno, don't worry. Let Halims. Let's give an opportunity to Halims. Halims,
Yes,
please try and round up within 2 minutes so that Honorable Haruno too can have a little dag.
Yes, that's my seat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues. My name is Honorable Abdullah Ibrahim Halims. I represent the good people of Ankpa, Omala, Olamboro, Federal Constituency, Kogi State. I want to join my colleagues in appreciating Mr. President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces for early presentation of the year's budget. And I want to thank my distinguished colleagues for their contribution so far. Mr. Speaker, I would like to narrow my contribution to a very critical sector of this economy, which is the mining and steel industry. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, the mining sector and principally the steel industry, if properly taken care of in our budget, a lot will be achieved, especially in the creation of jobs for millions of Nigerians. The Federal Republic of Nigeria has done very much in the past 4 years to resuscitate the Ajokuta Steel Complex. Efforts have been made, Russians have been contacted, and the presidential team has been involved until the COVID-19 intercepted the arrangement. And as it is today, there is no sector that was not affected by the pandemic. Now that the pandemic is over, I would like to urge the Assembly, this hallowed chamber, to help to contribute to ignite the federal government's intention in ensuring that, yes, the fund needed for the resuscitation of Ajokuta Steel Complex is activated. Today, in the present budget, about sum of 11 billion, 869, 656, 370 is the capital budget for the ministry. Between you and I, in view of the present state of things, we can all understand that unless this is reviewed, the aim, the objective of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to create jobs for our millions of Nigerians may not be achieved. So I create the indulgence of my honorable colleagues to ensuring in making effort to increase the budget of the mine and steel industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Haruna Michela.
Thank you, Your Excellency, honorable members. I want to, I'm Honorable Dr. Haruna Michelia. I represent all the good people of Askra Obahaul Federal Constituency, and I'm from Borno State. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by commending Mr. President, just like honorable colleagues before me have done. And I want to say that in our president, we have a president that always walks his talk. And I want to pick him on paragraph 43, where he said the priority will be to finish uncompleted projects. Mr. Speaker, from where I come from, the divisional headquarters, from where we have 3 constituencies, Biu, part of Borno State. We have 5 federal roads that go in and out of Biu. And all the 5 of them are in terrible state of disrepair. 3 of them, Honorable Speaker, have been awarded. That is the Biu to Gombe Road, Biu Damatu Road, and Biu Gombe. All of them are ongoing, except that of Gombe that we are waiting for the contractor to mobilize. I'm urging the Committee on Works to ensure that, please, as a matter of priority, let's have these 3 roads out of the 5 at least be rehabilitated. Another project, Your Excellency, that has been abandoned in my division or area is the Biu Dam Water Works. That project has been awarded since the time of Goodluck Jonathan. Unfortunately, Goodluck did not look on our side. Up till now, the project has not seen the light of the day. And since it falls under the category of ongoing projects, I'm urging the Committee on Water Resources under our distinguished Honorable Sada, he's not around, but at least some members are here, to ensure that this project at least starts. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, some people are talking of 10,000 IDPs in their state. We have hundreds of thousands of IDPs up till now. And our hardworking, amiable governor, Professor Babagana Umara Zulum, is still working very hard to ensure that people go back to their homes, to the detriment of even his life. I'm urging this House, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that with the zeal that this young governor is putting, we should support him to ensure that before the end of this year, as he aspires, all our people in the camps should return back to their base so that they can become productive. Before I sit down, I want to commend Mr. President and the National Assembly for revising the budget because of the pandemic. Somebody just mentioned that the pandemic is over. It is not over. And that is why we are still wearing our masks. And I want to commend the political will that this government has garnered and made sure that we have flattened the curve and cases are few and far between, but then it is not over. Mr. Speaker, just like you announced at the beginning, I'm happy to say that the committee, ad hoc committee on COVID-19 in collaboration with NCDC have established a COVID-19 test sample collection center here in the National Assembly. It is situated next to the annex, just by the side of the mosque there. And His Excellency, Mr. Speaker, will commission it at the end of the sitting today by God's grace. Finally, Mr. Speaker, before I sit down, again, in collaboration with the Interparliamentary Committee, my committee are putting up together a conference which will make us build back better post-pandemic next month. Thank you for the chance to make my contribution, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Honorable Stanley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues, I remain Honorable Adedeji Stanley Olajide, member representing Ibadan Northwest Southwest Federal Constituency. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I remain Honorable Adedeji Stanley Olajide, member representing Ibadan Northwest Southwest Federal Constituency. I'm from Oyo State. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, we're talking about 2021 budget. I need not say that we are borrowing and we are in deficit. I want to speak as a business manager. A business manager in the sense that I'll be looking at return on investment. Here we are. We're looking at what is going to drive the next boom. Mr. Speaker, it's going to be technology. It's going to be technology. It's going to be technology because we are looking at post-oil economy. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the whole world today, they are talking about analytics. They are talking about artificial intelligence. They are talking about cloud computing. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that will stop the leakages in our budget process, in our appropriation, is technology. Mr. Speaker, permit me to use finance as an example.
There is a lot of ways we can create jobs.
Chairman Finance, please approach it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are ways we can create jobs for our youth.
Francis.
In the sense that if we adopt the right technology, federal inland revenue, as an example, can generate a lot more than they are generating right now, Mr. Speaker. Technology, technology, technology will be the way of the future. We cannot continue to depend on oil and borrowing. We make enough money, Mr. Speaker, in this country, but we need to stop the leakages. And we know if we adopt the right technology, Mr. Speaker, as a technologist, I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, if we develop the right roadmap, if we do the right automation, Mr. Speaker, automation can stop all the leakages in our petroleum industry. Automation can stop the leakages in finance. The automation we're talking about can also see that the workflow and the process flow in which business is conducted will be sorted out. Also, technology can help us reduce the cost of governance. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity, and I would like to make a recommendation, Mr. Speaker, that all ministries and agencies must be compelled. All agencies and ministries must be compelled to invest in the right technology, to invest in the automation of their processes. We can also create a lot of jobs. We can create a lot of jobs for our youth who are out there right now on a different struggle. We can pull them back in, give them the right tool, and we can make Nigeria better. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and honorable colleagues, thank you.
Honorable Gwila.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, my honorable colleagues. My name is Mark Tese Gbila. I represent Gwe East, Gwe West Federal Constituency of Benue State. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute to this debate. I want to bring to the notice of Nigerians that we represent the bicameral legislature of Nigeria and the executive that certain statutory provisions of our laws that are made to provide fiscal discipline are serially being violated by the executive in the budget proposals and presentations they make to the National Assembly. Very quickly, I thank my colleague earlier. He mentioned the issue, but he glossed over it, but I think it's something that is bordering on statutory provisions and cannot be glossed over. Let me read very quickly the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. It provides in Part 2, Section 12, Subsection 1, that aggregate expenditure and the aggregate amount appropriated by the National Assembly for each financial year shall not be more than the estimated aggregate revenue plus a deficit not exceeding 3% of the estimated gross domestic product or any sustainable percentage as may be determined by the National Assembly for each financial year. If my honorable colleagues can please refer to page 9 of His Excellency Mr. President's presentation. It says very clearly in the first, let me start from page 8 very quickly. It says in section 50, the 2021 budget deficit is projected at 5.2 trillion. This represents 3.64%.
of estimated GDP, slightly above the 3% threshold set by the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. Now, it is important to note that Mr. President himself has alluded to the contravention of provisions, of statutory provisions of a subsisting act of the Federation of Nigeria. In 2020, the same thing occurred. If you look at page 3 of Mr. President's presentation, in number 12, it also says the projected deficit of 4.98 trillion or 3.57%. So what am I trying to say, Mr. Speaker? We are allowing, as custodians of the law, the contravention of the provisions of the laws enacted by this House. And those provisions were made based on sound financial considerations to ensure and enshrine fiscal discipline in the administration of the revenue and expenditure of our country. But it appears as if the executive does not respect this provision, and ordinarily I believe this budget should be withdrawn and the provisions of the Act should be adhered to. I, with the leave of Mr. Speaker and this Honorable House, would want to present to this House issues regarding the non-constitution of the Fiscal Responsibility Commission by this administration till date, which I believe is allowing this flagrant disregard of provisions of this Act, because the Commission itself is not instituted to guard their statutory responsibility. With regards to the issue of revenue, it is obvious that the definition of insanity, like they say, is to do the same thing all the time and expecting a different result. As a nation, we have not yet decided that we want to pursue seriously the issue of revenue in this nation. And I think that this is part of what the collaboration, which is commendable, between the House, or the National Assembly rather, and the executive should start to pursue. And some of us will be present at the commencement of the considerations for some constitutional amendments and reforms, because there are very straightforward and direct things we need to do to start to unlock the revenue that we need to transform the issues in this country. Finally, Mr. Speaker, with regards to the issues of IDPs, I have not seen a provision in this budget for the reconstruction and rehabilitation of communities that have a preponderance of internally displaced people. Mr. President, through the Vice President, promised my people in Benue State there was a 10 billion naira provision made in 2018 for this purpose, but not a single dime has come to our state in that regard. And I have not seen any provisions here, and our people are still dwelling in camps without intervention by this federal government. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me this opportunity.
Because you know how I was fighting with Damisa, I knew they would gang up against me.
Honorable Toby.
If there's anything you can technically.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues. My name is Toby Okechukwu, and I represent an area of Woji River Federal Constituency from Enugu State. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, it is very clear, and I want to thank Mr. President for being honest with this budget. He acknowledged on page 8 of his presentation that he was breaching the law by exceeding the deficit of 3% allowed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The deficit has, by convention, risen.
What's the point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues, my name is James Abiodun Faleke. I represent Ikeja Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I rise to respond to statements made by both Honorable Bila and Honorable Toby, allegedly saying that Mr. President accepted that he's breaching the law. The proposal before us, Mr. Speaker, the budget proposal before us is an estimate, it's a proposal. And it is only when we pass it that we put life into it that it becomes law. So there is no way here that Mr. President says this is a must that has to be done. And so we should be mindful of the language that is being used. And of course, we are also aware at the committee level that an amendment proposal is also coming for the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for the observation. This is not sacrosanct. It's a proposal and estimates, and that's why it's been laid for debate. And what we're debating is the general principles, not so much the details. What about us sustain? Honorable Toby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to thank Honorable Faleke. But I don't think it is untoward for me to say clearly that Mr. President was honest by what he brought to Parliament.
Was what?
Honest. He was very forthright about it. That the convention practice and our Fiscal Responsibility Act allows 3%, and that has been exceeded by 0.64%. It's very clear on paper, and I can read. Just a moment, sir.
Mr. Speaker, you are rude about this.
No, just a moment. Please, let me drop my point. So I was saying,
Honorable Toby, he's made a point. We've hit the gavel on that particular point. Let's just move on. Let's move on. Yeah.
Okay. We will proceed. We will proceed, and I leave that point of the deficit provision, which Mr. President had alluded that it represents the deficit.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Well, Mr. Speaker, I represent the opposition. We should be allowed to have our say.
No, but you were continuing to try to make the point. You know, there's no point being clever by half. You know, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, so just continue. Just move on, because you're taking your own time. Because you're opposition does not mean that you will speak inordinately forever. So everybody is timed. And if you want to use your time to continue to argue a point that we've hit the gavel on, it is your feel free. But we're timing you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm guided. Let me use my time. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the budget of the Federation was 4.6 trillion. Today, the budget of this Federation is 13 trillion. But when you compare and use the exchange rate, they all boil down to about 30-something billion, which means there has been a lot of motion without movement. Mr. Speaker, the provision for subsidy in 2014 was 268 billion. I appreciate the effort to christen and baptize this budget as budget of recovery and resilience. But we have not been told what has been spent on subsidy and on that recovery for the past 4 years, no matter what name you give it, Mr. Speaker. Parliament needs to know, and to what extent that has been plowed into 2021 budget. The recoveries that has been made by the deregulation. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, it is important for us to know that the Committee on Finance did a thorough work regarding some leakages with regard to agencies of government. Some of them are remitting 25% because that's the policy. Some are not remitting at all. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, in our very eyes, there is a lot of expenditure being done by parastatals and agencies of government. And I'll take one. It is on record, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, that the CBN has spent a whole lot of money in various interventions, close to running a parallel government, without appropriation. Mr. Speaker, if they have autonomy that allows them to trade with some of the monies in their custody, they should be prudent to report to Parliament what they've made. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, how I wish that the Parliament can guide them and provide appropriate information with regard to what our constituents want. Mr. Speaker, these various interventions, as of today, Federal Ministry of Works is owing about 300-something billion of liabilities. That is work done. And we have interventions that are so passive. What if they take this part of these trillions of intervention and say, Federal Ministry of Works, please, we are intervening. Provide Nigerians with roads. Let us offset your liabilities and you give us an appropriate framework to pay back that money. That will be a country working. So I believe that we need to go back. And even the 25% we spoke about, Mr. Speaker, CBN is not remitting. And the Chairman of Finance Committee can also have a point of order in this direction to affirm or not to affirm this story. But they are not remitting. And you can know what the Nigerian people are suffering and losing. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, you see, we must err on the side of prudence. We must err on the side of prudence to make this republic work. If they are intervening in infrastructure, please let us know. It will be a clear mandate. But to go on a Lone Ranger activity, creating alternatives, it will not help us. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Mr. President for including in his speech the Port Harcourt-Maiduguri rail line. It was part of your promissory note that any deficit, any further consideration of any liability or approval by this House, that this project must be part of it. We want to thank you for that, and we don't have any doubt that the activities of this Parliament may have occasioned that. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you a story. This rail line from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri and the one from Lagos to Kano were commenced, were envisioned the same day. And that was in 1913. And they were done basically for economic reasons. If there's any rail to be done in this country, there are those ones. Because they touch all the arteries of this country. And they will affect fundamentally the insurgency you have in the northeast, the agitation you have in the middle belt, and the agitation you have in the south-south and the southeast. And I have no doubt that when the rail from Lagos to Kano is completed, it will address some of the challenges we have, the banditry and the rest, because our young people will be gainfully engaged. So I want adequate attention paid to this. It has to. But Mr. President must also watch those who he is working with the regard to application of resources. If we are supposed to be doing rail, Mr. Speaker, we should not be doing fencing. We must have to subject these things to scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, this budget reminds me of the myth of Sisyphus. And the myth of Sisyphus goes with the story that the Greek gods had in one of their sessions condemned Sisyphus, who was a fellow god, to perpetual perdition. And his punishment was that he must roll a stone to the mountain top. Each time he rolls the stone to the mountain top, his punishment is that stone will roll back. And he will perpetually roll that stone. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the story of Ajokuta, if we don't overcome it, we are just children of Sisyphus. You have been there. You moved a motion for an infrastructure bill for it to be attained. We must overcome that perdition. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the story of Nigerian rail. As a young man in primary school, I used to go from Enugu to Zaria on rail. And from Zaria, I would transport by road to Dusima, which is in present-day Katsina State. Mr. Speaker, if we don't overcome the issue of rail by having a focus to these two primary networks, to these two primary economic corridors, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, Lagos to Kano, Mr. Speaker, we'll be children of Sisyphus. Honorable colleagues, for whatever intervention we have to do, I'm sure my colleagues are happy with the story I'm telling because we are touching the nerves. Mr. Speaker, if we don't devote some money to regard to Nigerian roads, you'll find out our contract will run for 20 years. You finish kilometer 0, by the time in 5th year or 7th year you get to kilometer 20, kilometer 0 or 1 is developing pothole. If there is any intervention that has to be done, we should pay attention to the road infrastructure in this country and the enabling framework for tolling them to make sure that the roads can maintain themselves and pay back for whatever loan is taken to build them. We will be children of Sisyphus if we don't do this. So, honorable colleagues, the die is cast. The responsibility is ours. I am happy that the chairman of finance has acknowledged here that this is a proposal. We have to retool it to make it to work for Nigerians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Toby. I feel for the children of Sisyphus, and we thank God that the Greek gods are different from Nigerian gods. And we will not suffer the same fate of those children. And if we have to go and beg the Greek gods, we'll go and beg the Greek gods. But good analogy. Toby made some very fine points, particularly on the issue of remittances. And I think we are all on the same page on that. Well, we have to look for ways and means to make sure that remittances are made and form part of the revenue of this country by government agencies. We have to amend our laws if need be, and there are loopholes and wastages in that area. CBN acting ultra-virus is one of the things I've always said. You cannot, what the President of America, or rather of Nigeria, cannot do, nobody else can do. You cannot spend money without approval of the legislative arm of government. I totally agree with you, Honorable Toby. I think it's important in this, if I may just quickly say this, when we pass this appropriation law, leader, I think when we pass this appropriation law, I think for the first time, I think we must have penalties embedded within the law. And that's not something we have never done. We just look at the appropriation law as a document. It's a law, like any other law. And if you look at your laws have consequences embedded in them, penalties embedded in them. And so I think we should look at adequate penalties for erring agencies or personalities who flout the law. So that may be a new innovation in this process. Is Luke still here? Honorable Luke. He left. All right, Honorable Luke. Sorry, you actually, yeah, well done. I knew you were supposed to, I couldn't get to you on time like I promised. So go ahead, Honorable Luke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. Onofiok Akpan Luke, I represent Etinan, Nsurubium, Federal Constituency of Akwa Ibom State, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by joining my colleagues to commend you and the entire National Assembly for the prompt passage of the 2020 appropriation and even the action we took when it was sent back to us for amendment. And that has helped change the budget cycle of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. Speaker, while studying the budget speech of Mr. President and the appropriation bill, I have a few observations which will form part of my submissions this afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I first want to commend Mr. President for timelessly bringing the budget as he promised, and it had to coincide with the exact date he brought the budget last year. And that is quite commendable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my place, they say, what is in a name? We found out that names can change things, names can bring good luck for people, name can bring prosperity. So it is against that background, Mr. Speaker, that I equally appreciate Mr. President for christening the 2021 budget that of economic recovery and resilience. This is apt against the fact that we are having certain forces that are militating against us as a country. We have had the pandemic, we have had the drop in oil price, so we need a serious thrust, just like a plane is taking off. And Mr. President, in his speech, has projected a recession, the country going to a second recession by this quarter, specifically by December. So in 2021, we need serious energy, serious thrust to be able to overcome the storms, to overcome the thick cloud that is
provided by the 2020 fiscal year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend Mr. President too for his commitment, which is reflected in his speech, for his commitment to executing programs aimed at lifting 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. And I believe that this will not face the challenge that we have had of policy somersault when the next administration comes in. I believe that we are going to institutionalize it so that successive governments that are coming would follow along this line. This is quite commendable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I come from the youth community. I have reason to where I am from the platform of the youth. So one very fine point in Mr. President's proposal is the creation of the National Youth Investment Fund and setting aside in a long run the sum of 75 billion, but for 2021 specifically the sum of 25 billion. Mr. Speaker, this is quite commendable against the fact that we have some young persons today who are making effort, who are quite innovative, who are quite creative. We have techies who are doing great things in this country on the platform of technology. But the great challenge they keep facing is access to finance to scale up their innovations or scale up their creativity. I believe that judicious application of the National Youth Investment Fund is going to be a buffer for our youth to access those funds and then scale up their production, and at the end of it all, stem the tide of unemployment that we have faced or we are faced with in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another commendable point is from Mr. President's speech is the 50% release for capital project in the 2020 budget. This is quite commendable, and I appreciate Mr. President for that. I appreciate Mr. President for the innovative financing strategy, like the setting up of the infrastructure company, which I believe that if well funded is going to close the infrastructure deficit or infrastructure finance gap that we have in this country, Mr. Speaker. Social investment program is quite commendable. Allocation of 420 billion to take care of like the National Youth Investment Fund and the Family Homes Fund. But our concern and the concern of my people is the judicious use. We've heard about stories of funds meant for social programs during the COVID era. We've read in the pages of newspaper. As a lawyer, I would only say that from the pages of newspaper, if it is true, it is quite commendable for us to have those funds meant for social investment program ending up in private accounts. So we are calling for judicious use of these funds that are allocated for social investment program. Mr. Speaker, I commend Mr. President for the allocation to power, which was of major concern. If we need to have the economic recovery that we are proposing, then we need to fix the power sector. And the allocation to capital investment or expenditure in the power sector is quite commendable. The 150% increase in the health sector is commendable. And then the 65% of increase in the education sector is commendable, Mr. Speaker. But we have, and I would be advocating for an increase, Mr. Speaker, in the allocation for agriculture and rural development, because that is where we have the, well, I could call the basic, the rung of Nigerians. And we are talking about diversification, and agriculture provides the basis for that diversification. So we need to increase that allocation to agriculture and rural development. Mr. Speaker, we would be advocating for an increase in the allocation to the Ministry of Works and Transportation, Mr. Speaker, with particular emphasis to railway development. Right now, before we go for alteration, constitutional alteration, where we'll be advocating for the listing of certain items like railway from the exclusive legislative list, we have to make fundings for railway development. And of particular concern to me, my state and my constituency, I mean Akwa Ibom State, and Nigeria in general, so that we can develop the Eastern Economic Corridor and even through the Northern Economic Corridor, is the Calabar, Oron, Ikorabasi, Port Harcourt, Lagos Coastal Rail. Mr. President made mention of that in his speech,
But somewhere along the paragraph, when he was making mention of allocations, he made mention of allocations to only the Port Harcourt Maiduguri rail line. So we'll be advocating for enough financing for the Calabar, Oron, Ikorobasi, Port Harcourt, Lagos coastal rail is of importance to where we come from. Mr. Speaker, we are going to be advocating too for an increase in the budgetary allocation for judiciary. Mr. Speaker, why this is so is that just some few weeks ago, Mr. President submitted the list of 8 nominees, that is justices of the Court of Appeal, to be elevated to the Supreme Court. And they are going to be provided with their accommodation, and they are going to be provided with their logistics. Mr. Speaker, we are on this floor advocated for additional provision of vehicular logistics to take care of the security of justices and judges, judicial officers, against the background of the insecurity, the kidnapping, and we had concerning a judge of the Court of Appeal and a judge of the Federal High Court. So we are going to be advocating for a little increase in the allocation to the judiciary to accommodate that. And in this one, Mr. Speaker, we have had a bill seeking to amend the Constitution, extending and enlarging the composition of the Court of Appeal. And if that sees the light of the day in the National Assembly, that means that we are going to be asking for the logistics to take care of those justices, additional justices that are going to be appointed into the Court of Appeal, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Speaker, there are some areas of concerns which I would want to share in this House. Mr. Speaker, one great area of concern is the rising public debt profile of our country and the burden and the obligation that we are putting not only on our children's generation, but even on our great-grandchildren's generation. Mr. Speaker, I want to be heard clearly. There is no problem in borrowing, provided we are not borrowing to consume. There is no problem in borrowing, provided we apply the proceeds of borrowing to judiciously, sincerely, and transparently to the building and development of infrastructure. But Mr. Speaker, we can reduce the borrowing of government if we check and plug the leakages in ministries, departments, and agencies. So I want to lend my voice with that of my colleagues, asking for, and with that of Mr. President, who has advocated for us to look at the revenue side of all ministries, departments, and agencies. And we make sure that they comply with the TSA so that we can reduce the debt profile of our country. It's of major concern to my people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another concern in the budget, sir, the fiscal responsibility bill makes it clear that the deficit, thank you, sir, that the deficit to, the deficit to GDP should be at 3% threshold. But for this year's, it is it's about 3.5 above the 3% threshold. Mr. Speaker, this is of concern to us because it is against the provision of the Fiscal Responsibility Bill of 2007, Mr. Speaker.
Let me ask you, Honorable Luke, because that's been mentioned by about 2 or 3 speakers here. So correct me if I'm wrong. I'm aware of the ratio, the deficit. Does the Fiscal Responsibility Act allow the National Assembly to adjust that?
Mr. Speaker, the National Assembly of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, by provisions of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, has the power to legislate for the Federation of Nigeria on any matter.
Yeah,
that
but is there a provision in the Fiscal Responsibility that allows you specifically to adjust? I believe there is a provision like that.
So that's why I am making the advocacy as we proceed. We can take this into consideration, sir.
Okay.
So, sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, in the course of Mr. President's presentation, Mr. President has made mention of Bill 2020 to us, and that is quite appreciated. But we hope that whatever is going to be in the finance bill is not to occasion additional hardship to Nigerians. So we should look at the content and then the provisions on the clauses of the bill that is going to come. Mr. Speaker, so that I round up, sir. Part of funding of the budget is going to come from proceeds of privatization. That is of concern to us, Mr. Speaker, against the background of what we have witnessed. Mr. Speaker, we have done privatization in the power sector. Part of what we are having in the budget today is 16 billion to be refunded for those who invested in the Yola electricity distribution company, Mr. Speaker. That means that, Mr. Speaker, we are calling for transparent process in the privatization so that we can engender investor confidence who would come in. Mr. Speaker, I would use this point to advocate for us to look at the issue around the privatization of aluminum smelter company in Ikorobas in Akwa Ibom State. If we resolve those issues and get that company working, Mr. Speaker, would have reduced the challenges we are facing today. So I'm saying all this to underscore the fact that whatsoever we are going to do under privatization, it should be as transparent as possible. So, Mr. Speaker, more funding should be given for roads, Mr. Speaker.
Another minute, please. So
1 minute,
round
sir.
up, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, roads leading to and out of Akwa Ibom is dilapidated. Of concern is the Calabar-Itu highway. Ikorekpene Umuohia road. Ikorekpene Aba road, Mr. Speaker. Funding given to Ministry of Works, additional funding would cater for this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we'll be advocating to funding for the transportation ministry so that it can take care of seaport development. We appreciate, Mr. President, for approving licensing for additional seaport. Of concern to my constituency and my state is that the federal government should support and then fund the Ibom Deep Seaport. An effort to commend the effort of the hardworking Governor Dongrebel Emmanuel, my governor of Akwa Ibom State. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the federal government approved reforms for construction of federal roads to states. We would be appealing that Governor Dongrebel Emmanuel administration had constructed roads in Akwa Ibom State amounting to billions of naira. So we are going to be advocating for that to be included in the budget so that just as it was done for Rivers, Osun and other states, that we are going to be refunded so that we can encourage the governors to continue with road construction, the construction of federal roads. With this, Mr. Speaker, more funding for security operatives so that we can have provisions of security of lives and property for Nigerians. Those are my humble submissions, and I move that this bill should be read the second time, sir.
Thank you for your very comprehensive contribution. Thank you, Honorable Luke. I believe you have spoken for everybody on that row in this column. Honorable Aaron.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remain Honorable Edu Olanrewaju, representing all the people of Abeokuta South Federal Constituency and from the state known to be the gateway state to Nigeria, and that's Ogun State. Mr. Speaker, let me first of all thank the leadership of this Ninth Assembly and all members for returning Nigeria back to the normal fiscal budget year of January to December. When we were growing up, what we grew up to know is Nigeria's budget in January to December. So I want to thank all members of the Ninth Assembly for returning Nigeria back to January to December. Now, I want to thank Mr. President for coming up with a budget of recovery and resilience. What is recovery? Recovery is something or a property you never had. And resilience itself is trying to get something back that probably had gotten bad but not beyond elastic limit. Mr. Speaker, I think there is need for us to recover the power of appropriation that lies with House of Representatives. With Budget 2020, and coming up now again with Budget 2021, what was the matrix of performance that the executive came up with to us to know that yes, 2020 had gone successfully, and now coming up with addition of 2021. There is need for us to know that coming up with a budget of recovery and resilience, there is need for Mr. President to please note that there is a major factor of infrastructure deficit in Nigeria. And we should not undermine the effect of infrastructure to promote economic recovery of this country. If we can, as a nation or a national assembly, add more to the budget of infrastructure, whether works or power, there will be a major difference and effect in promoting economic recovery nationwide. I want to solicit, therefore, that in this 2021 budget, we should not think of whether they will say National Assembly did padding or whatever or not. We should attach major importance to works and power to promote economic recovery nationwide. I want to therefore submit that this budget be read second term, but a major addition should be done to infrastructure and power. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I so submit.
Thank you, Honorable Edu. Honorable Manuso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleagues. My name is Mansur Manusoro. I represent the good people of Daras Uganjua Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I'm from Bauchi State. I rise this afternoon to lend my voice in the ongoing debate about the 2021 budget. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by commending the relevant stakeholders involved in the budgeting process in Nigeria for returning this country to January to December budget cycle. In particular, I want to appreciate your commitment and that of the Senate President for returning this country to January to December budget cycle. I could remember in August 2019, I had the privilege of presenting a motion that seeks to return this country to January to December budget cycle, and the motion was voted by the Honorable House. Moving forward, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time in the last 19 years that such a development is happening in Nigeria. So I think there is the need for us to take additional steps to improve the budget process by deepening citizens' participation. Let the Nigerian people take ownership of the entire budget process by giving their own input. We can do that by engaging the executive to make the federal constituencies to serve as a unit of input. I believe the 9th National Assembly can deliver this, and it can go a long way in ensuring citizens' participation. The entire budget cycle, we can have citizens' participation from the formulation stage to the implementation and then to the evaluation. Mr. Speaker, I believe this is achievable, and you can put that as one of the agenda that this National Assembly seeks to achieve. And beyond the budget, Mr. Speaker, I want to use this opportunity to charge the federal government to do more in providing the enabling environment for more private investments to flow. When you look at the national budget, it's inconsequential to cause the required economic growth in the country. Check the nominal GDP, for instance. In 2018, the nominal gross domestic product stood at 129.11 trillion. So when you compare the national budget, the proposed national budget for 2021, for instance, standing at 18 trillion, that represents just mere 10% of the nominal GDP. So I believe more is needed on the part of the executive arm of the government so that the private investment can flow, so that we may have an increase in the aggregate demand so that this private investment can affect the household consumption, because that determines the level of the economy. This is my humble submission, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
I think that will be it for today's contributions of the budget. We will continue. For those who haven't had the opportunity to speak, we will continue tomorrow. Okay, honorable colleagues, I'm sure if you click on your units, you will find that the budget has been downloaded or uploaded, whichever one, and you can see it on your screens now, the soft copy. If you hit documents, clap for yourself. Honorable Benila, can you please help the leader of the House find the appropriation on his documents? Help him. You know the problem, help him. From Dogwa. Yes. You might want to go ahead. Use your mic. He is.
Yes,
why are you not on your seat, Honorable Toby?
Yes, Toby. Can you go back to your seat, please? Can you go back to your seat? This is too costly, sir.
Thank you. So we're going to go to for members who are interested, we're going to go to the commissioning of the COVID center. Again, let me repeat that it's important, particularly those who we work with in the chambers and in our office, that they get tested periodically. And that's why the House has set that place up, which we will commission this afternoon, even as I leave now. It's at the annex. Clark, have you been tested? If you have not been, don't come and talk to me here again until after you get tested. You'll be the first to get tested when we go now. Yes. And please make sure your staff, your secretaries, your aides are all tested. We have about 3,000, if not more, people resident in this building.
Sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, if you would not mind, I would like you to make it categorically clear that the test will be from bottom to top, sir, so that the principal officers will be the last to be tested.
What are you concerned about? Yes, leadership will be tested first, starting from the House leader. So, leader, can you move for adjournment till 10 o'clock tomorrow? Let's see if we can get this thing right. The sitting is at 11, but let's see if we can just run through this thing in terms of the training, which we're supposed to do today. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.
Okay, thank you. Right, Honorable Speaker. Honorable members, I rise to move as directed by the Speaker that the House do adjourn till tomorrow, 10 a.m., for us to be able to start the training of the IT installations here. On that note, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn to tomorrow, 10 a.m. promptly, please. I so moved.
Any seconder? Leader.
That the House do adjourn till 10 o'clock tomorrow, as ably moved by the leader. I beg to second.
Thank you, Leader. Those in support of adjournment till tomorrow 10 a.m., please say aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
Now,